Chicago.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. I'm Nathan, one of your hosts here, also the senior producer of Bridging Chicago, and I am so thankful that you're joining us for another episode. Remember, you can find all the episodes of Bridging Chicago, including our prior four seasons, at www.bridgingchicago.com. You can listen to the podcast anywhere that you prefer on whatever platform, because we are out there on all podcast platforms. And you can, of course, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Bridging Chicago. And you can find us on LinkedIn by searching Bridging Chicago. Today, I am really excited to be joined by Lou Sandoval, who usually I say I'm joined by this person and here's what they do. But Lou, if I did that, it might take a while. So we'll just get into it. But I want to say thanks for joining me today.
No, thank you, Nathan. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited about this opportunity to talk with you about my story. So
yeah, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about your story. You are a technology executive, board director, author, speaker, DEI advocate, avid sailor. Somehow you do that in your spare time, so I guess you don't sail much. But you do all these things, and we're excited to hear about those. But we always start with where you're from, and we're happy to do that with you because, as I understand it, you are Chicago born and bred.
Yes, I am. And it's interesting. I'm a very proud South Sider. I'm a Southeast Sider, actually, to that nature. And that's, a lot of people say, well, where's the Southeast side? Because everybody thinks the east side of the downtown area is the east side.
Right.
But for us, it's where, as far as you can go in the city on Lakeshore Drive, and it turns into basically Indiana almost.
Okay.
I grew up a stone's throw from the Indiana border and about 2 blocks from the lakefront.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead with your thought there.
No, so I grew up first in the Cottage Grove Heights neighborhood, and then about 7th grade, we moved over to the South Chicago neighborhood, where my dad was a steel worker at United States Steel. And so we basically did that because, one, the house was closer, but two, to work, but two, it was just, it was a great opportunity to kind of be in a different neighborhood. And I missed my original neighborhood, but it was great. It was a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, I always find it interesting when people move in their childhood, because I spent my whole childhood in the same house, basically. Mm-hmm. We were in another house for a couple of years while I was, really, really young, but it was in the same town. So it's like the concept of people moving as a kid, it just fascinates me, because I can't imagine what that would be like to have your life uprooted and just move somewhere else.
Right. Well, it was interesting, that transition period for me happening in 7th grade. I had done all of my primary school at one grammar school. So I think the concession, man, I didn't have a say in it, although they asked me if I would do it, and I said yes. Mm-hmm. But the concession my parents made with me, I guess, was that I could complete my 8th grade at the original grammar school. So we basically commuted back to our old neighborhood. And I finished grammar school at Our Lady of Hungary, which was at 92nd and Kimbark, and then in the Burnside neighborhood, an old Hungarian parish that had been there since 1800s. And really amazing experience just seeing that neighborhood. I like to say that I grew up on the South Side when you look at the backdrop of the thriving post-industrial era. There was a lot of pride in Chicago as a manufacturing city, much like many other, one we now call Rust Belt cities. But and there was, you could see the impact of that, and the trickle and ripple effect of that was impressive. And the neighborhood that I grew up in, Cottage Grove Heights, when we moved there, it was kind of a mix between white and then African American. But every African American family that grew up there they were all nurses, professionals, etc. So everybody that I went to grammar school with, it was a Catholic grammar school, so they went there with the specific intent they wanted to learn. So we all had that common value. And everybody that went to my grammar school, we all ended up going to Catholic high schools, mostly. And then, people that went to Northwestern, DePaul, they went to different universities. And now, I still keep in touch with a lot of my high school, grammar school friends. And it's amazing to see what that neighborhood generated. I think in the what I call the fall of the South Side and the closure of the steel mills and the evaporation of 18,000 jobs, and the death of the industry that supported so much of that. There was an ex-migration, and we still see that today. When you look at the census results, quarter million African Americans have moved out of the South Side, and they have continued to do so. So I think it's just because the economic vitality is not there, and you need that in the city.
We haven't talked to many people who live that far south, and I find it really interesting how you're describing this, because we know that people have been pushed out of various areas of the city, but really don't often know why that happens. And so it was interesting that you're sharing about the jobs that were lost. And for you, did that have an impact on your family? And if it did, I mean, what was that like for you growing up, or even just seeing that happen to friends of yours? I mean, how do you kind of figure out what that means?
Well, it's interesting because, I'm transitioning. So I'm now in my early teen years as this is happening, and I remember on the times, I had the benefit of having a stay-at-home mom. My mom was the homemaker. My dad was the provider, but he worked in a job making, the equivalent. I think I remember seeing once, he would share with us, he made like $70,000, which in that era was a lot of money, but he did that working a lot of overtime, double time and a half. So that had an impact because he had to put 4 kids through private school, and even though we might have had some financial challenges at different times, my parents were so cohesive as a team that we didn't know that. I mean, I'm sure there were some sleepless nights, because there were various points in that era that there'd be a lockout or they would go on strike, and Dad would be home for a week, and we're like, Dad, what's going on? And he's like, well, the union's trying to figure out what they're going to do with the company and blah, blah, blah. And then, eventually, in the mid 80s, it got worse. And then in the early 90s, it just, they had the eventual shutdown. And, my dad got retired early with a lot of mileage on his odometer. And and that happened to a lot of families, because, I mean, there's a certain pride that you have when you're able to provide for your family. And when that pride and that dignity is gone, that's where the problems start. And so what I saw happen in our neighborhood is people start moving for opportunities. So the neighborhood, opens, people turn over their homes because they can't afford to pay for them. So then they go vacant. There's, vandalism and just all kinds of things that set in. Alcoholism goes up, substance abuse goes up, family issues, surface. And it's just a breakup of the nuclear family. And then that just begets all types of other issues. And that's where the South Side really has never recovered, I think. And because even out into Chatham, I had friends that lived in Chatham that went to my grammar school. And that area, I would visit through Chatham, and it was an amazing neighborhood. A lot of pride, a lot of, upstanding, double income families or single income families. And once all that fell apart, it got replaced with an area that nobody wants to go to anymore, and that's what happens when, for me, it's like I traveled to a different world. I went to undergrad at DePaul University, and just going from the South Side to the Lincoln Park campus, I commuted my freshman year, and it was like another world, and mind you, during that era, the early 80s, Lincoln Park was in transition. It was going from a predominantly Puerto Rican community to a gentrified, we'll call it yuppie community, or yuppies were going in, buying the 2 flats that had been, 2-family homes to Puerto Rican families, and all of a sudden turning them into single family homes that are worth now millions. And then later knocking them down and creating McMansions in the city. So, it's interesting to see all that happen. But for me, going to the North Side was like a completely different world, especially coming from an era where, there was so much pride on the South Side that was then kind of starting to fall apart. So
one of the things I want to ask you about from what you said is, you mentioned how people wanted to provide for their families. And I think that especially on Chicago's South Sides and West Sides, there's this perception that people don't want to provide, that they actually want to try and do as little as possible to get by. But what I'm hearing from you is that people really do want to do the work to provide for their families and to take care of their needs. But it isn't always as simple as just like, well, they just don't want to get a job. And there are jobs out there that they just don't want to get.
Or they don't have the means to transport themselves to those jobs. So I think, so there was the second era in the 90s of the South Side where a lot of the CNC and plastic manufacturing facilities started, coming up in the south suburbs, the western suburbs, a lot of injection molding facilities. So some people pivoted and they went to those manufacturing positions. But then when that became an issue, when that got moved to Mexico or to China or different places due to NAFTA, then that evaporated. So, it's like people will reinvent themselves because they want to provide. I mean, if you ask a person and you say, hey, would you take a handout or would you, want to provide for yourself? There's a certain pride that comes with being able to provide for your family, especially for that era where, the man of the house defined himself as the person that provided for his family. So it's an interesting, I studied, there's an interesting, they call it, it's a physiology, biology experiment that I read about in sociology class, but it was an interesting episode of where it was a gray falcon had injured itself and a bunch of zoologists had taken the gray falcon in and nurtured its broken wing. And, the gray falcon's a hunter, right? So he's used to providing for himself and bringing the scraps of the rabbit back or whatever to the nest. And, so during this time that he was being rehabilitated, he got used to being fed hand to mouth, right? And then so after a bit of time, when he got healed up, this is a big animal, so they're going to let him go. They released him. Interestingly enough, he came back to the zoology place, sat on the perch at the same time they fed him every day and expected the handout. And so it's somewhat of a metaphor for human dignity and the pride of humanity, because we would much rather, create and build for ourselves if given the opportunity, but we have to be given the opportunity. It's when we're not that we become dependent, and then it's just a downfall,
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think that it's a great metaphor to help that sink in a little bit. I want to ask you, because I like to talk to Chicago people about this neighborhood concept and interaction with neighborhoods from neighborhood to neighborhood. So you live, at least in a couple here, and two very different ones, or at least as we know them now, two very different ones. So for you, how did you see this neighborhood concept, and how did you see neighborhoods interacting with each other? Did they kind of interact with each other? Did people from your area come up to the north side, to the downtown area, or did you kind of stay in that area?
Well, we had that since everything was driven around the family. We would come up on Sundays when my dad would have the occasional Sunday. He worked shifts, so like every other week he'd have a Sunday off. So we'd drive to the north side, go to the museums, go to Lincoln Park Zoo. So I got a chance to explore different parts of the city and different cultural institutions and the like. But the age-old Chicago, we'll call it identifier is, what parish did you grow up at? And so early on, it was Our Lady of Hungary. Later on, when we moved to South Chicago, it was St. Michael the Archangel. So, everybody says, well, what's your parish? Where did you grow up at? Where'd you go to grammar school? That's everybody always relates that. Are you a Catholic League kid or are you a public school kid? So what were you? Catholic League South, Catholic League North. What was it? So there's that aspect of it. So then when you start to kind of interact with people, like I live in Bridgeport now, and it's an interesting, another neighborhood, because as going to Sox games as a kid, you knew that you could not go west of the Viaduct on 35th Street. You just couldn't. I think once in like 8th or 9th grade, we went to a concert at the amphitheater, which is off of 43rd and Halsted. And we parked on the opposite side of the street because we found street parking and we didn't have to pay for it. And I think we came out to, people harassing us and saying, hey, what are you doing in this neighborhood? So that's how it was. I mean, now I love it because Bridgeport's probably one of the more diverse neighborhoods in Chicago. I mean, it's like my block looks like the United Nations. It's great. So, I mean, that's why we selected it, because it's a lot like the neighborhood that I grew up in.
I love hearing stories from Chicago people about neighborhoods, because I think that they really point a lot to where we're at now. And even, I've lived downtown, in the downtown area for a while now. And I think that one of the things that I really like is how it changes every day, because obviously we get a lot of tourists, but with tourism comes multiculturalism, because there's people from all over the world coming here. And while they're not necessarily living here, I think you still can get that exposure to that if you go and look for it. And if you just, hey, you talk to someone while you're on the train together, or while you're, waiting in line at the art institute together or whatever. I think there's still a lot of opportunity to learn about people from all over the world.
Yeah, no, it's amazing just walking around, like going like lately when it's been very nice, go down to the Bean or go down to what I call the Faces Fountain, and just see all the just watch, just people watch, and you see all the different, nationalities that come to Chicago. And, they say we're still a little lagging in the post-pandemic, return of tourism, but I'm optimistic that this summer that'll change. I think people want to get out and they want to start traveling, and when we're done with being locked up. So
yeah, I am right there with you. I know that when you first started at DePaul, you wanted to be a doctor. That was the goal of yours. That's what you thought you were going to be, and path changed a little bit. So talk to me about like going in with this desire to be a doctor, and then kind of what changed about that.
Well, I think it really starts with a curiosity. I think I was always very curious in what made things tick. I was that kid that, and this might sound kind of weird, but so when my pets would die, like I had a goldfish die, I wanted to see what he looked like inside, So, and my uncles had bought me like a microscope and like a dissection kit. So my mom, I think I scared her once because I was outside in the backyard, and I was supposedly going to bury him in the backyard, and I decided to cut him open just to kind of see what he looked like. And then I wrapped him in a napkin and buried him, because I was just curious. So that was always my curiosity. I'd cut flowers apart and try to look at what the stamens and the pistils look like inside of them. So that was that curiosity. But I think it got nurtured further in my involvement in Boy Scouts, which happened in roughly about fourth, fifth grade. And that's really where I started, it allowed I won't call a very nerdy kid to really stretch his wings and try a lot of different things. And that's where I effectively, got involved with a lot of STEM, merit badges. And then it allowed me to kind of get out on the water as well. So that's where I was first exposed to sailing. But it was really where my passion for science kind of started. And then, I went through high school. I wouldn't say I was an amazing student. I kind of had to work hard to get my grades. It's not like I'm not gifted in any such capacity, but I had to work hard, and I got the grades that I needed to get, and I got a scholarship to go to DePaul, and then I decided to major in the sciences. Originally, I started out as a radiologic technology major, and shifted midway through my freshman year into a biochemistry major. So I majored in biochemistry, minored in physics, chemistry, and psychology. So it was
easy.
Easy stuff. But and then I got accepted to medical school, and then decided that kind of wasn't what I wanted to do, because and I've always been this kind of entrepreneur, which is kind of and that was stoked by selling cards, selling candies, different things, and so there was always that side of it, that again, building things, seeing what makes things tick, building companies, building businesses. So, I kind of pivoted on that.
So, quick question. While you were doing your undergrad, did you see in your classes, did you see a lot of people of color? Did you see a lot of diversity in those classes? We had, I would say, a few Hispanics, very few African Americans, quite a few Indians, of Asian descent, Asian, we'll just say Asian period. But that was a diversity that we had, and DePaul was, kind of evolving. Now you go to campus and it's amazing, what they've done with the campus and the broader reach that they have for the university versus just, working class students from Chicago, like myself. But, that it is amazing. But I was one of the few, especially in the sciences, because there's a huge drop off. And it's probably why I'm such a big advocate now for making sure that underrepresented communities see the impact that a STEM career can have for them. Whether it's coding, whether it's going into medicine, whether it's going in engineering, it's such a liberator, and you can really recreate yourself. That's awesome. And I think that obviously it did a lot for you. And I like to talk about how people choose their first job or career path, because I think that we have a lot of people who listen, and especially at this time when we're, people are graduating and
Mm-hmm.
kind of coming to that spot where we're trying to figure out what's next, whether they're graduating from high school, graduating from college, or maybe, it is the great resignation. People are doing all kinds of different things. Maybe they're going to school now, as an adult. And so for you coming out of college, what what were the motivators for you and behind finding your first job, and how did you go about doing that?
Well, it's interesting because what ended up resulting in my first job started out as an on-campus interview. I was coming back from class and I was going to my dorm, and there were some tables set up in the student commons, and there was a company there, company by the name of Abbott Laboratories. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing on campus. They're like, hey, are you a science major? They saw me carrying a big, huge textbook, and they're like, are you a science major? They're like, would you like to learn about the career opportunities at Abbott? And I'm like, well, that's kind of, and I didn't have anything going on that afternoon. So I stopped to talk to the recruiter, and, she's like, do you have a resume? And I said, yeah, I do in my room. I can go grab a copy. She's like, well, let's talk, and then you can grab it and bring it back. We'll be here for the afternoon. So I did that, and, didn't think anything of it, just happened, and, like, well, if something fits, we'll be in touch. And then, so the whole summer happened, post high school. This is my senior year. Post a whole summer happened. I go and, I'm doing some thesis work out at I got accepted into Loyola for medical school. So I'm already working at the Loyola campus doing some research with a researcher there, and then out at Argonne National Labs in the Southwest Burbs. And so I'm kind of doing this research, and all of a sudden, I have this epiphany that I don't want to go to medical school. And, I'm looking at the reality of coming out in massive debt, and, the changing, medical environment, because it started, that was the impact first of HMOs, when they started to kind of change medicine, and then the cost that it would take. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to have to go further in debt to do that. So I made a lot of decisions at that point that summer, and sat down with my dad and said, I'm not going to do it. And he's like, well, I don't want to do it after all. And he's like, well, you're done. He goes, I just don't want you sitting around the house. I hope you don't. And it's like, you didn't teach us to do that. So it seems like, I think it was about almost a month after that conversation, that I get a telegram, and it's from Abbott. And they're like, hey, we're happy to have met you. So-and-so met you at the campus. We'd like to see if you'd be interested in coming in. And we'd like to talk to you about a program that we have for science majors with high leadership capabilities, and we'd like you to talk to us about it. So I went in, I interviewed, and lo and behold, I started a couple months after that. So I went into this program, and that's kind of, so now I'm on the business side of sort of the medical profession. So
yeah. Well, and you describe yourself as an entrepreneur by nature. So I'm guessing in all of this, you kind of at some point thought, one of the things I really want to do is start my own business. I want to be my own boss. And so was there a point that you remember thinking that, or is just that built into your DNA really?
So it was, so my career took me from Chicago, then at Babbitt Park, basically North Chicago area, out to Seattle. And in Seattle, so I'm sailing with, I'm already in the sailing community, and I'm talking to customers as I'm building rapport in the sales process. And I see things, mementos and stuff around their office, and artifacts, sailing artifacts or pictures of boats. And I'm like, so do you boat? And they're like, yeah, I actually have a boat in the harbor over at Chill Shoal. I'm like, how often do you get out on it? Not a whole lot, because I'm so busy with my practice or this and that, and I started hearing that theme over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And I already got ingrained in the community in Seattle. So then I'm like, I went to a couple vendors, a couple guys, technicians and the like, and I said, if I pull all my business through you, and we make the customer the central focus of this, let's kind of create a, sort of an empire where we can have these guys and manage their boats, make it ready for them, do the maintenance, provision them, do the yearly upkeep, the monthly upkeep, the weekly upkeep. And they're like, awesome. I said, the only thing is we have to do an amazing job, under promise, over deliver, and very simple, we'll call it mission. And then I went to these guys, to these customers, and I said, so if I could offer these services for you, would it be worth X to you? And they're like, absolutely. So then I started, so we started, managing 4 or 5 boats, And, it was a nice side revenue. Obviously what push some of it through to the sub vendors. I take a little bit for myself for being the sort of the project manager on the role. And, it then gave me access to use their boats. And that's when I started doing a lot more ocean sailing and, cross Pacific sailing. And it just opened doors for me, and then, so I sold that business when I sold it to one of my subcontractors, the book of business. And then my career took me from Seattle to Miami. And after being in Miami for a little bit, I started getting calls from guys who said, "Hey, listen, you were doing this for so-and-so up in Seattle. We went to medical school together, blah, blah, blah. Would you be interested in doing the same thing?" And I said, "Well, I got a lot more responsibility. I got a larger area." They're like, "No, come on, we'll help you. If it's money, I'll spot you." And I'm like, "It's not that. It's time." So this one guy was really persistent, and I replicated the same model. So that's kind of how that all kind of rolled up.
I was thinking about Tom. I don't know if you're familiar with Tom Domerick.
Oh yeah, Tom is a mentor of mine. Yes.
Okay, he was a former guest of our podcast.
Oh really? I didn't know that. Wow.
So you have to check out his episode. I believe it was season 3. It may have been season 4, but I think it was season 3. They all flow together now. We're in our 5th season. But really interesting guy, a really great guy, and just a really fascinating conversation with him. So I thought that might be something you'd be interested in checking out.
Yeah, Tom is actually, he's a mentor of mine and a very good friend. So it's interesting because we get together and do dinner on a regular basis, and we're connected in a lot of different ways. So it is. We did my book launch recently. He came out with his wife to the launch. It was amazing to see him there and kind of be able to acknowledge him. So
well, we're happy to be another connection in the life of Lou and Tom. So, I was thinking, I was like, hey, like these guys, if they don't know each other, they should. But I'm glad that you're familiar. Entrepreneurship is really just filling a gap, right? It's just finding a gap in something and creating something that can fill that. And then for you, it sounded like once you were able to do that, you kind of just walked the path that made the most sense in growing that. And so if there are people out there who are thinking about starting a business or wanting to become an entrepreneur, who are nervous or who are even, who did start and they're, in the infancy of that, what would you say to those people? What advice can you give? I know it's a big question, but, what can you say to people who have that same mindset?
Well, you have to start with a pain point. It's like, what is the pain point that you're trying to fix? It could be a product that helps a pain point. It could be a product that creates a pathway to opportunity for others. Like in the case of the marine services company, it was a pain point. These guys had boats that they weren't using. So the filling of the gap, as you said, was to create an avenue for them to facilitate that enjoyment of their boat, an asset that they had, and make it simple for them. So that, in today's terminology, and technology, which is kind of the field I play in now, it's, you're seeing this massive, run of innovation. People are seeing things, hey, this was done via spreadsheets for 3 decades, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we could do this through artificial intelligence and machine learning. Awesome. Let's create a platform that'll, integrate all of that and make it easier,
Okay.
I work now I advise, my firm advises entrepreneurs at the seed and the pre-series A stage. And when I talk to, founders, and they're kind of, because founders are usually really good at the idea part, the vision. They may be good at the operation of the business if they've had experience in that, or they're good at the technology side of it, the product, okay? But seldom is an entrepreneur really good or a founder good at all three. You usually have to either get a partner, a co-founder, or build a team around you. And it requires, while it requires a fair amount of hubris to say, I'm going to make this happen and have the vision and be positive, it also requires a bit of humility to say, I got to know what I'm good at and what I'm not. So I really work best with those founders that are humble enough to say, I'm really good at the vision, but I'm not good at the rest of it, and I need help there. And that's why we come in and we help them.
Yeah, I've learned that self-awareness is very important as an entrepreneur. So that really points to that. I do want to get to your book. So let's talk about your book, because I want to make sure we get there. Because, I mean, you've lived quite a life already, and I'm glad that either someone told you to write it all down and get some thoughts out there, or you decided to do that on your own. But I guess talk to me about how the book happened. How did this idea come about, and then how did it actually get to be a book?
Well, I think it happened in a couple different phases. I think in high school, I was blessed to have a lot of mentors. Growing up, I was blessed to have a lot of mentors that kind of were my little angels that guided me along the way. My high school guidance counselor was a big one in that he encouraged me to really create a bucket list early on and to pursue that bucket list. And that bucket list had a lot of things like, cross an ocean, sail around the world, climb a mountain, jump out of an airplane, different things like that. And then softer things like make a difference in a child's life, be a parent, find the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, create an amazing family, And so I started journaling probably in, I'm going to say, sophomore year in high school. More, people do yoga to kind of find clarity of mind. For me, journaling for a kid that was somewhat of a geek and a nerd was a way to kind of, talk about the different insecurities that I had, the different challenges that I had, and to find clarity of mind. And I just started journaling and keeping these journals and notebooks and stuff, and they traveled with me throughout. And then during the pandemic, I was mentoring a couple of different people, and they're like, man, your life just seems like it's always on a roll. You're always accomplishing your goals and you're succeeding and you're just doing so many different things. They're like, it's amazing. Don't you ever struggle at anything? And I kind of started hearing this over and over. And I'm like, that you ever seen that meme that's just basically like an iceberg and it says success? And below the water is like all the things that lead to your success.
Right.
Well, and that came to mind, and I'm like, and I said, no, actually I've struggled a lot. I said, I'm the epitome of failure. I failed a lot. And in failing, you become better, So I started going through all my journals and kind of putting them in outline format. And then I started seeing a cadence. And that's when I said, I had another colleague, his son was writing a book, and I got a chance to meet the publisher, at Fig Factor Media. And that's when I talked to Jackie Camacho Ruiz, and she said, Lou, you need to tell your story. You need to tell your story. It can motivate so many different people, especially in this pandemic. And I think it's the right time, because during the Great Resignation, everybody's reevaluating what it means to work and what do you want out of your life. And for me, the different challenges, being diagnosed with a form of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at one point in my life was a reality check for me to say, you know what, if I can get through this, I will never complain another day in my life about what I have the load that I have to carry. And I got through it, and I've not looked back. But it shouldn't take a catastrophe like that in somebody's life, like a heart attack or cancer, to have you value the fact that every day is a gift. So don't leave any stone unturned. And so for me, that's the sort of the thesis of the book, is really no matter what, you can do it. And the cover selection, the graphics on the cover were very symbolic, because it's a blind curve on a hill. And as you read the book, you'll know why mountains are so important to me, but metaphorically in real life. But it is a blind curve, because life is a lot like a blind curve sometimes. You're on this road, you got to stay between the white and the yellow line, and you don't know what that turn's going to look like when you come around it. You just know you got to stay on the road. And that tenacity is what keeps you on the road. So for me, that's really the nexus of the book, of what drove me to drive it, to see that despite all the different challenges that I've seen in my life, whether it's heartbreak or loss of a job or loss of a loved one or whichever, cancer, sickness, health, you can do it. It's because if this simple guy from the South Side can do it, you can too,
Yeah. Well, if that doesn't inspire you to read the book, then check your pulse, because I don't know. That was definitely, I'll definitely be getting it. The book is called Tenacity for Life, Lessons in Life, Business, and World Around Us. So we'll definitely be ordering a copy, because it sounds fascinating. Your life has been fascinating, and there's so much more to go, which is the amazing part, is that there's chapters yet to be written.
Yeah, I'm still writing it. We'll see what the next Tenacity series goes. I'm working
Yeah.
on a second book right now. I'm organizing it, but it'll be at least a bit before I kind of come out with that, because I want to give this one some time to really, kind of saunter and go and talk to different people about it and share the vision, share the story.
Yeah. Well, we hope that people do. Lou, can you tell people if they want to connect with you, if they want to look at the book and see if they want to purchase the book, how they can do all that?
So the easiest way is via my website. So there's two websites that I would recommend. One is www.lousandoval.com, and then the other one is www.tenacityforlife.com, which is the book site. Both of those are kind of linked to each other. You can find me through either of those. The book's available on Amazon. We're working on the ebook right now, and then we'll be going into the studio to do the audiobook very soon. So,
awesome.
So we'll have that. I'm sort of an audiobook guy because I kind of churn at a very high rate. So I, it's kind of one of those things where you always see me on headphones when I'm walking someplace. It's probably listening to a book. So
Yeah, I'm the same way. I love audiobooks, so definitely be looking forward to that. Although I don't know if I'll wait. I actually like physical books more, but at time, it's just audiobooks are so easy.
Yeah, no, physical books are good. So if I love a book a lot, audio, I will buy the hard copy, and then I'll read it a second time, and that's when I annotate on it. Because how on Audible you can kind of do the electronic notes. I do that, but that's never enough for me because I got to be able to open it, go put a Post-it on it, open it, and revisit it. Again.
Yeah.
So
there's something about pen to paper.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's that you commit it to mind a lot more, I think, when you do pen to paper.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give you a chance if there's anything else that you want to share, anything you want to leave us with. I want to give you the stage, so the floor is yours. If there's a thought you can leave us with, we'd love to hear it.
No, I think, fundamentally, I think really our city is going through, our world and our country is going through an amazing time right now, where everybody's kind of reprioritizing things. They're looking at it. And I think really I call it my true north. And I think everybody has to look at what their true north paradigm is. For me, I use a mnemonic of a pyramid where the top is the success that you can be, the best you. The middle are the factors that contribute to you being happy. Okay. And then at the base of that pyramid are your core values. So that's what you stand on. They lead to you being happy and fulfilled in your life. And then at the pinnacle, they lead to your success. That's your true north. So for me, when I coach like individuals or mentor them, that's kind of what I say. You've got to find what your true north is. And then you just got to go in that direction and continue to know what makes you greater and stay away from the things that don't, because it's so easy to get sidetracked, and life's going to throw you curveballs. And if you know where your true north is, you'll be able to stick with it. So that's kind of my message for everyone.
Yeah, thank you for that. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Again, if you want to connect with Lou, make sure to go to lousandoval.com. That's where I went to find out all kinds of information about Lou, to read about his book and see about getting that on Amazon. But Lou, I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. I know it's a great resource, and so we appreciate you giving that to us.
Thank you, Nathan. I appreciate your time, and thanks for all you do and telling these stories in Chicago.
Yeah, we love it. So we'll keep doing it. Thank you again to our listeners for tuning into this episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast, and we look forward to connecting with you down the road. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions, and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.